Right, so my name is Prachi. I'm the co-founding director of a design practice called EcoResponsive Environments. We are based in Brixton in London. And so the focus of this presentation really is about an eco-responsive approach to get Britain building again and foster discussions around that. So the problem, we need 1.5 million homes in 5 years, and as was underlined in the session in the morning on the new urban renaissance, that is not just about how much, it's also about how, but it's essentially about delivering quality at a certain pace. And it is very much about designing settlements that are, so it's not just delivery of homes, but neighborhoods that are resilient and inclusive. And those that address the current environmental and social crises. So in essence, I think there is shared consensus around wanting to design places that instill joy and places that center and focus health and well-being. And we are all aware that the solution of such complex and interconnected problems will not come from one specialism or subject. So we do need to bring together experts and knowledge from across the arts, sciences, and humanities. So then the question is, how do we structure this integration? And so it does call for an integrated multi-scale framework for both design, planning, investment, and related to development. And I would probably be saying this to be converted, but we do know that a collection of sustainable buildings do not make a sustainable place. And so our thinking must encompass all scales, from individual buildings through to positively connecting up more strategically with the wider context. And doing that in a way that we can ensure it positively shapes and responds to human needs, so immediate needs, facilities, amenities, housing, whilst enabling support from ecosystem services, which then underpins our longer-term survival and existence. So we do call this approach eco-responsive design, and it is very much rooted in the wider donut economics framework that was proposed by Kate Raworth. Now, system thinking is absolutely central to this, and this is one of my favorite definitions of system thinking, where we see both the wood and the trees. So we are thinking both strategically and at a detailed scale simultaneously in parallel. This thinking and approach has also underpinned and is the underlying premise of our new book published by Routledge called EcoResponsive Environments, co-authored with Ian Bentley and Sue McGlynn, who were two of the original authors of the seminal Responsive Environments published back in 1985. And so through the book, we do explore how a design approach rooted in systems thinking and what are its implications on everyday practice in further detail. So to do that, we do go back to basics, in that we do understand built environments as complex systems, complex ecosystems, which contain nested subsystems at different scales of space and time, and all are linked through utilities and infrastructure. So when we think about an eco-responsive approach, it is very much how do we integrate these layers into a circular economy in which each faster changing subsystem reuses and recycles those that last longer, and together, how they come together to engender a sense of place. And so the focus is not on individual subsystems. Yes, they are critically important, but it is very much on the relationship between the layers and on how we can make the whole more than the sum of its parts. So in order to do that, it's also important to understand, in our view, that settlements are made of what we think are the deeper layers and those that we feel constitute a settlement's surface order. So the deeper layers would be the natural infrastructure, so landform, water system, green systems, the overall strategic street networks, which once formed are really difficult to change without significant investment poured into it. The surface order, in comparison, comprises of the plots, the uses, the structuring of that, the buildings, the architecture, individual materials, components which can change at a faster rate. Now, contradictorily, however, in the past decades, investment has largely been driven and focused on layers that constitute the surface order, often at the expense of deeper layers. And so we argue that systems thinking demands, in essence, that we refocus the balance between how we think and design the deeper layers so that it can create resilient underpinnings for the surface order. So the following slides use one of our projects, the Heath Park project in Runcorn near Liverpool, as an example of how we have implemented this approach in practice. So just for a bit of background about the project, Heath Park was once the headquarters of the chemical giant ICI. And before we came on the scene, the clients on the project had already transformed the site from being a single occupancy site into one of Britain's leading business and technical park, housing more than 120 scientific business and research scientific and research businesses, with their corporate facilities linked into local communities. So that had already happened. And what the client really wanted us to do was to further transform Heath Park. And so it was essentially an urban regeneration project. And to move it forward as a beacon of innovation in terms of health and well-being, inspiring climate-appropriate ways of addressing Runcorn's severe health and deprivation issues such as obesity, access to nature, car dependency. Runcorn is a very typical example of a suburban English town, and loneliness. So to show realistic way forward, we had to balance the project's longer-term economic, social and ecological beacon values against the shorter term financial ones. And the design team had to evolve this balance collaboratively with the client, with the regional and local authorities and other stakeholders. And more locally, there was an interactive Heath Live website that engaged with local residents and local businesses. The project was active during COVID. To get their inputs and to understand their needs and aspirations. So the following set of slides will essentially go layer by layer to outline the project's eco-responsive approach and hopefully try to foster debate around the wider reimagination agenda for getting Britain building again and for securing design quality. So we start with the water system. The project proposed and embraces a gravity-fed circular water system, minimizing our demand for external systems of supply and treatment, whilst maximizing biodiversity and therapeutic value. So there are two components here. We have the surface runoff and we have wastewater. So surface runoff is minimized with green roofs and permeable pavements, and drainage from roads and parking areas are captured by swales and rain gardens, creating a nature-rich environment. And the more important and probably the more innovative side of the water system, the water strategy proposed, was around grey water and black water. So the strategy included the idea that grey water and black water from buildings is treated on site through a constructed wetland that recycles, treats the effluent, and also doubles up as an environmental learning center. So I guess as a project team, we were really trying to push boundaries, moving beyond suds and thinking about wastewater and black water in the context of the much strategic issues related to sewage and pollution of the rivers. Next, the green system integrated a variety of ecologically rich productive spaces connected through tree-lined corridors, streets and courtyard gardens with a wider, the existing wider framework of nature reserve, sports pitches and traditional parkland that were adjacent and abutting the site. to create an extensive park system that cuts across and links beyond the red line boundary. For example, we had a national grid line that cuts across the site, which you can see sort of running diagonally on the top plan to the left, and that was transformed. So the national grid easement was transformed into a half a kilometer long wildflower meadow right that offered extensive natural corridor for pollinators, but eventually connected into the existing nature reserve beyond. Analysis by Liverpool John Moores University, who were an integral part of the project team, using natural capital accounting framework, assessed the scheme as net positive across 6 key ecosystem service indicators. Next on to the street system. So in terms of the movement system, Runcorn is very much a suburban town, as I said before. So what we understood was that Heath Park is well connected internationally, nationally and regionally, but when we undertook the space syntax analysis, the local space syntax analysis, it revealed a very coarse, disconnected pattern for local connectivity. And you can see in the 2 plans where hotter colors indicate the most connected streets and vice versa. This disconnected pattern essentially imposes car dependency even for shorter journeys. And so to turn tables around, we reimagined the system to support healthy walking and cycling for local travel with a much finer grain connected street layout that stitches the site into its wider context. At a much more finer grain, elements like planting, trees, bollards were used to sort of tighter corner radii on streets, for example, were used to calm traffic, filter vehicular routes where necessary, so that the streets can be reclaimed as safe social spaces for play where appropriate. With an electric club bike hire and increased public transport frequency, the travel plan works towards Liverpool City Region's 2030 net zero carbon targets. Moving to the land use system, which must maximize financial value. So we did that by locating activities to take advantage of the street connectivity and the therapeutic value of natural infrastructure, and more importantly, a phasing strategy that enhances the commercial and social offer from day one, enabling existing facilities to continue operation throughout, so that new existing communities can grow with the new residents around job, housing, leisure, and green opportunities. Enabling vibrant convivial places, plots form fine-grained mixed-use perimeter blocks with mixed tenures, frequent entrances from street, clear distinction between fronts and backs, and more interestingly, to build social efficacy from relationships that stem outside of immediate family. The project explored 3 scales of social interaction: the private, i.e. private back gardens, balconies, etc., the communal, which is resident-only secure communal spaces within the blocks. They might be communal courtyards or guineas, and public spaces, each with a specific purpose. Moving on to the building systems, the idea of slow architecture underpinned the architectural strategy, which is creating of adaptable buildings, long life, loose fit. And for this site in particular, because there were existing buildings on site, they had concrete frame structures with a 12-meter deep floor plate, which really helped us embrace a retro-first approach in trying to reuse some of those, those buildings as live-work unit, residential uses, and commercial and lab spaces. The Heath Park's utilities and infrastructure system responded to climate crisis and environmental degradation at 3 scales: site scale, cluster scale, and building scale. At site and cluster scale, there were regenerative microgrids of renewable energy, water, and waste that maximized energy efficiency and shared resources amongst diverse users accommodated within the buildings. At a perceptual level, we learned from the human affinity to the therapeutic effects of nature, more popularly known as biophilia. by building in the idea of fractal organization of architectural aesthetics. So we move away from minimalist aesthetics to organized complexity within our built environment, not just buildings, but also how we design our open spaces and public realm. And so in conclusion, finally, the complex systems approach, what it did for us as a team was to help us identify a reimagination agenda for healthy placemaking across a range of scales. It did collide us with this question of how we can make the most sustainable option also the most viable one. And I guess I'll conclude with 3 lessons that we learned by being part of this project. First one was around client aspirations, development brief, which is backed by wider political will. That really set the stage up for us on this project. Second lesson was around project management and the absolute critical importance it plays. In the end, a project like this, it is akin to orchestrating a symphony. And thirdly, it is the power of storytelling, because, and I'll end with a quote, as the environmental communication specialist George Marshall puts it, people may read information in the form of data and figures, but their beliefs about places are held entirely in form of stories. So I guess we need to work together as an industry to create new narratives and new stories to change existing conventions and sort of underpin a wider political planning policy renewal. Thank you. Thank you for listening.